All right, so we're going to use this image for our model. We're going to separate her from the foreground and the background and then add it to our current scene. So the first thing we're going to do is use a new Photoshop selection tool. And you may or may not know about this tool depending on where you are in the course and how much of it you've gone through the course. So what we're going to do is we're going to select our quick selection tool right here, or the magic wand tool, whichever one you have last selected is fine. And then we're going to click on this little button here to select our subject, because Photoshop is going to automatically find our subject and select her. How cool is that? I love it. All right, we're going to go ahead and zoom in and fine tune our selection, which is the quick mask mode. I'm going to go ahead and double click on this so I can change this back to a red color, because that's what I'm used to using. So we used that purple for a previous selection. So let's go ahead and put it back to red. I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And then I'm going to press Q to get back into that mode. Select the brush with the letter B. And then with black, we can add to our selection. So I'm just going to go around our subject here and fix any areas that need to be added. This area right in here, we need to remove. So with the letter X, we get our white on the foreground, and then I can start removing from the selection. You probably know this already, so I'm just going to quickly go around the image here to start adding and removing from the selection. And I'm probably just going to go ahead and speed this up, since you already know how to do this. And there's really not much else that I can add to it. So I'm just going to go ahead and make my selections and speed it up. All right, let's go ahead and add our layer mask so we can make adjustments to it later on if needed. We're going to go ahead and click and drag this layer over to our document and place our model in place. Right now our model is looking over to the right, but because our shadow monster is going to be over here to the left, it'd probably be better if she's looking at the monster versus looking away. All right, so the quickest way to get her to look the other way is to select our free transform tool with Command or Control and the letter T, right click and select Flip Horizontal. We also need to make our model smaller because she looks like a giant right now in this particular scene. So I'm going to hold down my Shift key, click a corner, and then drag it down in order to make her smaller. I might want to go just a little bit smaller, maybe right about there. Click Enter or Return to commit to that size. All right, so as you may or may not know, in photography, composition is one of the key elements to a great photo. And one of the rules that we can apply to photography is known as the rule of thirds. And if you apply this to your composites that you create, you can end up creating a much stronger composition by following the rule of thirds. So an easy way to make sure you're applying your main subjects along the lines of the rule of thirds is to apply a grid to the image and then move your subject accordingly in order to create that stronger composition. So to do that, we're going to grab our crop tool with the letter C, and that's going to give us a little crop outline around our image. But in order to see the actual rule of thirds grid, we need to click on a corner, and then we get the rule of thirds applied to the image. So basically, the rule of thirds states that if a subject is placed along one of these lines, it creates a stronger composition. Right now I do have her in a strong position right here, but a stronger composition is done at an intersection or a point where all these lines intersect. So in order to create a stronger composition, I can move her up to this area here, but the only problem is she's going to end up being in the field. So if you apply this crop tool and your subject is not along one of these lines, you can go ahead and guesstimate or place a guide in that position and then click the escape key on your keyboard to get out of that tool. And then with your move tool, you can click and drag your subject into position. Okay, so that's just a quick tip for using the rule of thirds for a stronger composition. Now, the next thing we need to do in order to make sure that we can make this look as realistic as possible, even though it's kind of a sci-fi type of composition, we still want to make it look as real as possible. And the one thing we need to do is we need to add a shadow to our subject, because right now it just looks like she was placed on there, and without that shadow it looks kind of fake. So I'm going to zoom in here and I'm going to show you how to create a drop shadow to your subjects. Okay, so the first step in creating our shadow is to duplicate this layer. So let's do that with Command or Control and the letter J. We now have a duplicate, and next we want to remove our layer mask, and we want to be left with just our subject and none of the background or the foreground of the original image. In order to do that, we're going to right click on our layer mask and select Apply Layer Mask, and now we're just left with our model. All right, so let's go ahead and move our shadow into place with Command or Control and the letter T to get the free transform tool, and then we can start manipulating this layer in order to position it where we need it to create the shadow. But here's the cool thing. If we hold down our Command or Control key, we get that keyboard shortcut where we get that one arrow like we did in the beginning of this project. And then if we click on this center option here, we can resize and reposition this layer to create that shadow, and we can create the angle to match the lighting source within the scene, and that helps it look much more realistic, because if our light source is coming from the right and the angle of the shadow is over here, then it's not going to look realistic. It's going to look photoshopped. So our main source of light is coming from right in this area. That's the brightest part of this image. So we want the angle of our shadow to match that. So make sure you hold down your Command or Control key, click on the center anchor point right here, and then just align the angle to match the light source. So I'm going to go right about there. I'm going to click Enter or Return. Let's go ahead and zoom back in here. And then I want to reposition this in a place that is below her feet. I don't want it to be away, because then that's going to look unnatural again. So let's place it right there. And we also want to move this layer below this one so that that shadow is below her feet right here. Now we need to change this layer to black to create the shadow. All right, so to do that, we're going to come over here. We're going to hold down our Command or Control key, and then we're going to click on our image thumbnail right here, and that's going to automatically select that layer for us. Then you want to make sure you have black set to the background, and then we're going to use another keyboard shortcut, which is Command or Control and the Delete key or the backspace key. All right, so we filled in that selection with black. Let's unselect with Command or Control and the letter D. All right, now we have our shadow, but it still doesn't look realistic because it's too dark. So let's go ahead and adjust the opacity to our liking so that it blends in with the foreground, and that's going to help it look more like a shadow. So I'm going to do right around 50 to 60%. And then the last thing we need to do is we need to soften up the edges so that the shadow doesn't have hard edges. So we're going to go up to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and then you can adjust the pixel radius to your liking. You can do anywhere from 3 to 10, whatever you like. I'm going to do 3.5 pixels, and that softens up the edges of the shadow, and that helps give the realistic effect of a drop shadow. All right, so far we've added our model, we've added a shadow, but it still doesn't really match our scene. Our subject is a little too bright, so we need to darken her up to match the rest of the scene. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in so we can get a better view of what we're working on. All right, so we're going to need to add a few adjustment layers in order to darken her up. We could do it all in one, but I like to stack 2 or 3 in order to build up and darken the highlights and the shadows as needed. So I'm going to go ahead and apply a curves adjustment for the first one. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this top anchor point and I'm going to pull it down. And what that's going to do is it's going to darken up and flatten out the highlights of this image layer. But the only problem is the edit's being applied globally to the entire image. And we can see that when we turn this on and off. So in order to confine this particular edit just to this image layer, what we need to do is clip it to just that layer so it's not being applied to any of the layers below it. To do that, we can just click on this clip to layer icon right here, and that will confine that edit to just that layer. So as you can see, when I turn it on and off, it's only affecting our model now. Now the other way you can apply it is by right-clicking and select Create Clipping Mask. It's just easier to do it on the editing panel right here. All right, let's go ahead and add another curves adjustment. And this time we're just going to pull it down to make it really dark. Let's go ahead and clip it too. So as you can see, it's already blending in with the image much better when it's darker versus brighter. And we're just trying to match it with the rest of the scene. I'm going to go ahead and pull down the highlights again. But this time what I want to do is I want to paint on the edits of our subject just to build in a little bit more depth. So right now we have our layer mask is completely white. So the edit is being applied to the entire subject. So let's go ahead and invert it, and then we're going to paint on our edits with a brush. So the keyboard shortcut to invert the selection from white to black is Command or Control and the letter I, and then that removes that edit completely. So now we're going to go ahead and grab a brush. Let's zoom in first. And then we can paint with white to add that edit exactly where we want it. So I'm just going to go ahead and apply it to the entire part of our subject again. And then I'm going to slowly paint it away with black. And I'm going to do that by adjusting the opacity of my brush to something smaller, like around 15 to 20%. And then I'm going to go around the edges where it's a little bit brighter, because maybe that sunlight or the main light source is coming towards our subject and then wrapping around her. So we don't want it completely dark in the back, because there might be some sunlight spilling around the edges of our subject. All right, let's go ahead and duplicate that layer so we can make it darker with Command or Control and the letter J. Go ahead and right click and create a clipping mask. And now we've just doubled how dark it is. It's too much, it's too intense. And I want to go ahead and remove the highlight from this area right here. Let's go ahead and put that up to 100% and remove that. The other thing I want to do is I want to drop the opacity of the overall layer so it's not as intense. So we just want to adjust it so that it matches the rest of the scene as much as possible. Unless there's another light source that's coming from behind her, then we're not going to see a lot of detail in her jacket. So if we go ahead and turn those three off, we can see that that makes a huge difference. I'm going to go ahead and bring the opacity back up to this one here. I just want it a little bit darker, and we're going to put it right about there. All right, our model is now done. Let's go ahead and group the layers with Command or Control and the letter G. And go ahead and rename it. Now wouldn't be a bad time to save it either, and we can do that with our keyboard shortcut, which is Command or Control and the letter S. All right, we are almost done. The next step is to add our lightning to the scene, and then we'll go ahead and finish up by creating our shadow monster. All right, so if you're ready, let's go ahead and get started with the next video.